Boker Tov Machane Rama. I'm Sam Orloff here with Danny Rubin from the Mahon Radio Intensive. Today we're here with Mort Steinberg. He was a camper here at Ramah in the 1950s. He was the president of Ramah, Wisconsin, as well as the president of all the Ramah, the National Ramah Commission, right? So, welcome, Mort.
Boker Tov.
Thank you. So I guess our first question for you really is about when you were a camper, and I think we'll start there and then work our way up. So,
so obviously camp is a lot different than it was 5 years ago, and you said you were in the 50s?
I came to camp in 1955, and I was a camper here until 61, and then I went on the first Ramah seminar in Israel in 1962.
So I'm sure there was a lot of physical changes in your mind. You want to tell us about it? Were there any new buildings? The buildings were here before?
Essentially, with very few exceptions, all the buildings today were not here in 1955. There were first of all, the camp was much smaller physically. There were only about 250 campers and maybe 60 staff, including there were a whole staff of Meltzarim. The campers were not Meltzarim. We had waiters. We had fewer teachers. The madrichim were also the teachers for the shiurim, the kitot. And so it was a much smaller place, and pretty much you knew just about everyone at camp. Physically, the Beit Am had been built that year, 1955, but that was not the Moadon. It was not the two addition to Teatron and that other Moadon Chadash, which is pretty old now. They had a few new cabins for the girls. And they had one new cabin that had been built the year before for the boys. It was Srif Aleph and Bet.
So I had a question about your Nivo summer would have been 1961, correct?
1961, there was no Nivonim. At that time, camp was structured in two Eidot, basically. There was Machaneh, which was kids who were not yet in high school, and there was a Machon, which was kids who were in high school. And that was the way the camp was divided. Machaneh eventually became Ada Aleph and Ada Bet and Machon. So at that time, in the late 60s, there were three Edot. But it was a much smaller. You were in the same Ada, basically, for at least 2 years.
So that 1961 summer, if I'm not mistaken, on what is now cabin 11, 12, 13, 14, there was a fire.
No, the fire was in 1962.
Oh, okay. So
and it was the cabin that had been built by the people from Green Bay and a couple of years before. And we were in Israel at that time on the seminar, and we heard about it. So I wasn't here to experience it, but I heard that everyone got together and they moved all the books out of the Sifriya to the Beit Am. They had a long chain of people passing books to save the books in case the Sifriya, which was called the Mishkan Torah at that time, burned down. But luckily it did not, and it was a big event, 62. But I was away from the camp at that time.
Okay, so obviously the Nas were totally different, but was there any traditions like dance on it? The town show is on the Hesed only, not here.
There was no Mirpeset Amanut Nagarut. There was no Binyan Nagarut Amanut. Amanut was in what is now the Merkaz for Education. That was the Amanut. That building had been the Beit Am until 1953. When they built the second Chadarocho. So that was the Amanut. And there was no talent show. The big drama production was put on by the counselors. At the end of the summer, they put on a big Broadway show in Hebrew. It was Oklahoma, it was South Pacific, it was Fiddian's Rainbow, and primarily the junior counselors and counselors were in that, and they would rehearse nightly in the Beit Am after we had gone to sleep, and that was the big show.
So if you go in the Beit Am, right, there's plaques everywhere. And those only begin in about 1980. So, were there any plaques for these plays?
No, no, because the staff put on the big play, the big machazeh. Each Edah had their own machazeh, machazot perhaps, but it was just like a pula, and they would put it on for the rest of the camp, but it wasn't the big event that people were looking forward to. I was in one machazeh.
Which one?
In 1955, the only machazeh I was in, I was a fireman. The play was Ir HaYeladim, it was written by Leah Abrams, who was the wife of the director. Jerry Abrams became director after Seymour Fox, and Leah Abrams was the Rosh Dramatica, and she wrote this play, Ir HaYeladim, and I was a fireman, and I sang a song.
Okay, so another very famous tradition in Camp Amon, the last night of camp, also at the Beit Am, there's no smoking, which is like a celebratory ending of the camp where the whole camp gathers. It's the last time the whole camp gathers together in the Beit Am. It's obviously a very old tradition. Is that there when you were a camper?
It was started in the mid-'50s by a junior counselor at that time, Gary Rosenberg. Gary Rosenberg and some of his friends saw that in the Chadar Ochel, which was then the new Chadar Ochel because it was built in 1952, there was a big orange sign saying no smoking. And he was also very into music, and he picked up and he said, we're going to sing a little song about it. And it just took off, and every year became more and more popular, and he continued that tradition on. That was probably 56, 57.
No smoking. Absolutely no. That song?
Yes.
No.
Gary Rosenberg, Rabbi Gary Rosenberg.
Oh, that's crazy. That's awesome.
So we're told that you know a lot about camp history. Obviously from when you were a camper, but also beforehand, and what this place was before it was Machane Ramah in Wisconsin. So
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about about before this became its current?
This was Larson's fishing resort or fishing village. Some people call it Larson's Wagon Wheel Resort, and it was a resort that was founded probably in the 20s, and the cabins, there was cabins that were built in the Merkaz, which is now the, for education, that building was the main lobby for the resort where people would gather. But it was a fishing village, and people would come and rent a little cabin for their family, and there were probably 10 or 12 cabins. Very few remain. The Nivonim cabins are some of the original cabins. And during the Depression, in the 30s, they were having a lot of trouble, and then following during the war, they had trouble. And apparently it went into receivership and bankruptcy, and people in Chicago heard about it, that it was available for sale. And Rabbi Ralph Simon, who was the rabbi of Rotfei Tzedek in Chicago, decided that he wanted to send his son, who's Rabbi Simon also, but who's retired now in Virginia, Matthew Simon, he wanted to send his son to a Jewish camp in the Midwest. He was sending him to a Jewish camp in the East, and it was too far to go. So he decided that he was going to start a Jewish camp here, and the seminary thought that would be a good idea. The seminary had recently started a program called Leaders Training Fellowship, LTF, in New York, and they wanted to do something for the kids during the summer. And they said, well, here's an opportunity. We'll start a Jewish summer camp, conservative movement. And people got together, and they bought this property for about $45,000. And
it's worth a lot more now.
Yeah, I would think so. And it was a long way from Chicago, but there was a train that would come up, and we would come up on the train, the Chicago Northwestern train, about 10-hour train ride. And they started the camp in 47, and it grew.
So when you started, were most of the campers from Chicago, or?
Most were from Chicago. When camp started in 47, this was the only Ramah course. And they had campers from Chicago, New York, Philadelphia. By the time I came in 55, there was already Ramah in the Poconos. And that was the camp for the kids in the East. And in 55, the campers came from Minneapolis, Detroit, Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, and those were the main areas. Cleveland. But, as Ramah expanded around the country, the territory of Wisconsin diminished.
So can you tell us a little bit about, you said that you were the first Ramah seminar in 1962.
1962.
So can you tell us a little bit what that was like? I mean, I can imagine that it had to be a little chaotic because it was the first one.
Yeah, and I'm sure it wasn't as many people going as there are now.
No, there were only 65 or 66 of us. It was very selective. There were a lot of people number of people from Wisconsin who wanted to go, who were not recommended by the director. You had to be recommended by your own director to go. It was done strictly in Hebrew. There was no English by the staff at all, which was initially annoying to us since we're not totally fluent, but that's how we learned. And we learned Hebrew by the guides, and our guide, there were two buses. Our guide was Avraham, and he spoke only Hebrew. By the end of the summer, we were understanding what he was saying, but it was a fantastic trip, and we really had classes. We had Kitot every day. We were on Kol Yisrael. We sang Shabbos Zmiris one Friday afternoon on Kol Yisrael from Tzfat, actually, and we had... it was a wonderful opportunity because it was a smaller group and we met kids from all over the country.
Okay, well, you said on seminar it was a little difficult for you to comprehend all the Hebrew because it was only spoken in Hebrew. What was like the Hebrew level of everyday life at Kibbutz?
Same thing. It was Hebrew. There were no announcements in English at camp. It was only in Hebrew. There was a Luach Modod. It was only in Hebrew, which is really, when I became a junior counselor and I had to know what was going on, I had to learn to read Hebrew pretty well, Beli Nukudot, because that was the Luach every day that the staff got. And if you wanted to know if you had Shmira that night or when the Chanutiyah was open, you had to be able to read Hebrew. So really, the absence of English on an official basis really led all the kids to be able to learn and comprehend Hebrew.
So would you say in general that there was a lot more Hebrew spoken around everyday life at camp than you were at camp and as it is now?
I think there was, yeah.
How long, so you said that you were a junior counselor. Obviously, you went on seminar and you came back. How long were you here?
I was a junior counselor in 63. I was a co-counselor in 64. I was a full counselor in 65. And then I was invited back to be another year as a counselor, but I was going to have the same Rosh Hashanah I had in 65, and I wasn't willing to spend another summer with him as a Rosh Hashanah. So I went to another camp, and I was a counselor at a day camp actually for 2 summers. And then I came back in 68 and 69 as head of the waterfront.
So what do you think of the waterfront? I mean, I'm guessing that has changed quite a bit since you were here.
Well, actually, not that much, because I was while I was waterfront director, Bert Cohen, the director, asked me to start a sailing program, which we started in 68. We also started water skiing, and we had water skiing for a few summers. We had a Rikuz group in Skia. We would swim to Bowers. Besides the island, we had some programming in scuba diving. I taught scuba diving to some to the best swimmers, and we had, of course, hot salah and all the other stuff.
That's a lot more stuff than we have now, for sure. I
Yeah.
thought maybe a little bit less. But apparently
No, that was, well, I had a good time. We had a good program.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But we had no kayaks. We had bootsiyut, but no kayaks.
So I think the other thing is, before the interview we were talking, and I think maybe if you could speak about to that a little bit. Why'd you come here? Why did you come to Ramah in the first place?
Because my parents said, you're going to Ramah. I mean, it was that simple. Yeah, I was 10 years old, and I had been going to local day camps in Chicago, and they said, okay, this summer you're going to Ramah. And the reason they said that is because of Rabbi Lippis, of course.
So obviously Camp Ramah was like the main camp in the Midwest for conservative Jews to go to. But was there any other alternative?
I wasn't aware of. It turns out, I mean, later on I heard there was Herzl, I guess, but I didn't know. I didn't know about any other
Ramah's
camps.
better than this.
I didn't know about any other camps, overnight camps. It was Ramah, and then later on I learned about other camps. But by then I was already, a vatik here.
So your first year in 1955, how old were you? What did you do?
I was 10. I was in Srif Bet. You
So
had.
you would have been like Barney, or how was it?
Well, the youngest age group was 10.
Yeah.
There was no one under 10 except my cousin Freddie, but that was an exception. Well, I guess Fred was 9, and they allowed him to come because we were all coming as a family. But it was just Srif Aleph, Srif Bet, Srif Gimel. My brother was in Srif Gimel, I was in Srif Bet. And then the second year I was here, I was again in Srif Bet, so I kind of like to say I flunked Srif Bet. But the first year I was like the youngest person in Bet, and the second year I was the oldest person in Bet. But one of the things I learned to appreciate later was the staff was just tremendous. There were a lot more rabbinical students, there were counselors, and a lot of the great people, giants really, of the conservative movement had their beginning here at Camp Ramah, like Elliot Dorff and Joel Roth, and Neil Gilman was here, and Jake Bloom, and just giants, really.
So when you started, how long were you here for? I mean, now
8 weeks.
8 weeks. So it's
There was only 8-week camping. Everyone. I was the youngest kid. I was 10 years old, and you had to be here. It was only 8 weeks. It's very simple. You go for 8 weeks, and after 4 weeks, the parents would come up. But it was a lot more. In certain respects, it was more. The religious tradition was a little more liberal. It wasn't as formulated as it is now. For example, they had visitors' weekend on Shabbat, and people would drive. So the question was, you can't drive into camp on Shabbat.
so they park outside.
So what they did was the baseball field, which was right here where these tennis courts are over here, to the left, because what's now the baseball field was a swamp. And there was a baseball field here. They would sell the baseball field to someone who wasn't Jewish, and then they would put the Eruv, so the baseball field was outside the Eruv, and they said, well, people could drive to camp because they were coming to Shul to daven on Shabbos morning. So that was the legal fiction they used, and they would come Friday night for they had services down by the Agam, and they would drive on Shabbos morning so they could spend the Shabbos here during the day. And that was the procedure for about 4 or 5 years.
So I kind of got a question about something you said earlier. You mentioned that campers didn't melt. You had like professional melters.
Absolutely.
Waiters. So who were they? I mean, did they
Staff?
yeah, or
They were kitchen staff. They were Jewish guys. You had to be Jewish. The head Meltzar in 1958 was Bill Lebo from Cleveland, who eventually became the dean of the rabbinical school at JTS. Rabbi Lebo was the rabbi at Bethel. He was my rabbi in the 80s, and then he was the dean of the rabbinical school in JTS. But he started Ramah as a waiter, the head waiter in 1958.
So did he double as mashkiach?
No, he was just Meltzar.
Well, in the Hadar, now we have dress codes. Like we have to have shoulders and kippah at all times. And on Friday night, you also have to have long pants if you're a boy. So was there any dress codes similar to that?
Similar, yes, very much. But on Shabbos, the dress code was everybody wore white. White pants, white shirt. Girls wore white skirts, white blouses. Everybody wore white, and it was quite pretty, actually. It was quite impressive. And it would have Shabbos down by the lake. But again, we did not face east. We didn't face the Ohel Yitzchak. We faced the Agam, because that was the beautiful, and we saw the sun setting across the lake behind the trees. It was very, very, very beautiful.
So can you speak a little bit? I know you were mentioning that where the softball field now was a swamp. So
yes.
So I know you also said that camp was geographically smaller.
Yes, because they hadn't encroached into the forest as much as they have.
Right. So
now.
can you how far did it go out?
Well, there were where you have the basketball courts now. You had tennis courts, and on the other side of where the tennis courts are, there was basically a driveway that went into the garage that's used for storage under that girls' cabin. But beyond that driveway, everything was swamp. The main entrance to camp was through the girls' cabins, that road that comes in through the girls' cabins, which is now just pedestrian walkway. The guest house wasn't built. The forest came up to the road that comes in here behind me by the guest house. There was no guest house. There was no staff housing over there. They had one basketball court.
Was the garbage
cement.
trail?
The garbage trail was there because that's how they got deliveries up to the kitchen still. But there was the director's house was the limit of the key car. It was beyond the director's house. Behind there, where there are 3 cabins now, there was no cabins, and there was no cabins on Nivo Hill. There was nothing there. It was all forest.
You said that there was only one basketball court, and I know personally one of the things that I look forward to every year is the basketball games. What was the basketball? Was there any big basketball games where everyone would come and watch, or was it just
No, there were basketball games, but it wasn't a big Yom sport or a thing like that. And I wasn't that much into basketball anyway, so we played. In fact, with Srif Aleph, all the older kids were playing on the baseball field. So our counselor decided we would build our own baseball field, which was where Ohel Yitzchak now, in front of Ohel Yitzchak, there's a big acre of grass. That was all kind of sand and swampy. So what we did is we leveled the sand out, and we built our own baseball field down there, and we would play down there in 55 and 56. We called it the small baseball field.
So obviously there was swimming, there was basketball, you added voting, and there was tennis. What other activities was there? I mean, was there a radio station yet? Or?
The radio station was started in 1960, I think, or 61 by my brother and Joe Steinberg and
we have the original,
Jimmy Weitzman.
Machine right there. But...
Could be. And the two of them started the radio station, WRMH, and got licensed by the FCC. And that was a new pula, basically. But there was, we had a pula in wrestling, because one of the guys on the staff was a champion high school wrestler from the state of Illinois. So we taught wrestling. We had Nagarut. We had Makela was actually, I love baseball. I once signed up for as much softball as I could. And I once signed up for Basis Banot. And the program director didn't catch it, so I became the instructor. But I did. My counselor one year said, don't do Basis. You have enough Basis. Do Makela. So I went to Makela, and I appreciated his Eitzah Tova. And, we had boating and...
You said you're on Ramaki today. I know Saturday night, I think it is, they perform on the key car right in front of the altar before dinner. Is that always the situation?
It was Friday night they did that.
Friday, yes,
Friday night, right after Kabbalat Shabbat Marav, there was a staff Makela that would sing on the steps of the Chadar Ochel, and it was really very beautiful.
Okay, well, you also said you were really big into baseball. I know that back in the 50s and 60s, baseball was huge, much bigger than it is now. Obviously, baseball goes on during the summer. How did kids that were really into baseball find out the scores and stuff, and who was doing well, what was going on?
Oh, from the major leagues.
Yeah.
We were pretty remote. We would get a lot of kids would subscribe to newspapers, and we get the Sun Times sent up.
So I'm the only kid who subscribed. I subscribed to the newspaper.
Great,
as well,
great.
so.
We would get newspapers, and everyone would rush to read the Sun Times and see what the Cubs did the prior week, and that's how we learned. One year, though, I came up the camp a day early, and I was able to string an antenna between two trees and attach it to a radio that I brought. So we were able to pick up, if the weather was right, we could pick up Radio Rhinelander. And occasionally we turn it on at a time when we can hear the ball scores.
That's awesome.
That's really funny.
Well, you obviously have a lot of memories about camp when you were a camper. Do you have anything specific, like one memory that really stuck out to you? Favorite time at camp, favorite people at camp, best friends?
Well, we had a lot of friends. My closest friends today are people I met at Ramah. In 1957, I was in Srif Hay, and next door to me, in the bunk next to me, was a guy, David Benson. And the first day at camp, I was showing another guy how to throw a stick. And I threw that from Srif Hay was down by where the boathouse is now, the oars and paddles, and I threw it towards the Chadar, and I unintentionally hit David Benson in the face and broke his glasses. And so he wasn't real friendly with me, and he had to go through all summer with white tape on his glasses. But we became very good friends, especially because his mother would send him chocolate chip cookies in a tin. And when he was out of the cabin, I would open the tin and take a little cookie, and he didn't like that. But we're very close friends now, and he lives about 3 blocks away from us. And so we had you develop friendships here that are really, really for a lifetime.
So when you guys were on staff, did you guys get days off?
When I was a camper, the junior counselors had 2 days off during the summer. That was it. And they would go out in a bus and they'd have some big yitziyah. But by the time I was on staff, we had a day off every week, except I think the last week. And we would go into town, and sometimes we'd go up to Bond Falls in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula. And yeah, we'd have a day off. It was nice.
Also, as campers, once a year now, we have a Yitzhak where we go to the river into town and we do all sorts of events. Last year we went bowling. I don't know. As a camper,
No, you weren't allowed to go out of camp except that the older kids were able to hike once a year if they wanted to Conover.
So there wasn't like campouts?
There were campouts, but you didn't go into town. You were kept isolated. We would have the big on Yom, now is Yom Yuchad, I guess, when you have special things. We would hike once a year into Conover, which was 7 miles, and we'd go to the Dairy Queen, because there was a Dairy Queen in Conover, and that was a big time. You could buy stuff there, and then the pickup truck, because the camp didn't have a bus, the camp pickup truck would come, and we'd all get in the back of the pickup truck, and they'd drive us back to camp. But that was before seat belts and all that other stuff.
So I gotta ask about movies. Did you guys watch them? I mean,
Movies were brought in to camp by seaplane at the first few years of camp because it was hard to ship them. And so a seaplane would come and land and drop off some movies and pick up some movies. And they were horrible. I remember the worst movie we would see for a couple years in a row was The Boy with Green Hair. And I think the staff thought The Boy with Green Hair was about this kid that was ostracized, but then eventually he became friends, and we should like everybody and that kind of stuff. But it was a horrible movie. Horrible movie.
So I just got one last question. So you said that camp was very remote and they had to bring even like movies in by seaplane.
Yeah.
So mail, I mean, did that come?
The mail was delivered every day. There was a big mailbox out by where the girls' cabin are now, and they would drop the mail, the sack of mail there, and they would sort it out and we'd get it. But we had, in turn, I don't know if there's still Yom Doar, we would have 3 times a week. We were required. You could not come to dinner without having a postcard or a letter to send home or to an aunt or a relative of some sort.
Yeah, well, now it's only once a week.
3 times a week.
All right, so I think we just have time for 2 more questions. So, the food. How was the food when you were a camper?
Well, we weren't exactly gourmands. We pretty much ate if we liked it. If we didn't like it, we didn't eat it. But it was, I think, a little simpler. Last night we had here for dinner beef bourguignon, which we never had. It was very good. We had once a week was always hot dogs. We knew the people in the kitchen there, and we would have hot dog eating contests, which apparently they don't do now. But with Srif, we had Srif against Srif, and we had.
He ate 25.
Oh, kol hakavod. But we had. I only ate 11 once. That was my time. But our Srif ate like 150. And on Srif Tet in 1959, we ate like 150 hot dogs, and we beat Srif Chet, which only had like 130.
Only 100.
But today they won't give you that many hot dogs, I guess, from the mitbah.
Yeah, we ran out. I would have gone to 50.
Yeah.
All right,
But the food was, and we had then they used the leftover hot dogs in like a pea soup, and they had a pea soup with little chunks of hot dogs. It was,
yeah.
All
right. Mort, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your visit, and thank you for all the work you've done both here at Camp Ramah, Wisconsin, and also for all the Ramahs around.
Thank you for inviting.